You're listening to Watchman Internet Radio, Sunday, January 20th. Brace yourselves. Come on now. It wasn't that bad. It was only 60 seconds. Maybe it jarred something loose there, and we can make a breakthrough today. Well, as I said, today is Sunday, the 20th of January, 2019. I still haven't gotten used to saying 2019, but today, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses will be in their kingdom halls studying a particular Watchtower study article. Today's article is entitled, Trust in Jehovah and Live. Ostensibly, it is based upon the prophecy of Habakkuk. And perhaps some of Jehovah's Witnesses think that it's some sort of interpretation of the book. But rather, it is simply an extrapolation of a few verses and apply it in a very general way. And as I've mentioned before, that seems to be the Watchtower's method now. The prophets have been watered down, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and in this case, Habakkuk. There's no real endeavor to dive in and understand what the prophecy is all about. They're just applied in a general way, goody-goody, feel-good thing. Trust Jehovah, that's it. What is this prophecy really speaking about? Do Jehovah's Witnesses even care? I have to wonder. The scripture comes to mind in 2 Timothy chapter 4 where Paul was exhorting Timothy to, be at his work as an evangelizer because the time will come when they will not put up with the helpful teaching, that they'll surround themselves with men who just tickle their ears, teachers who tickle their ears. And I have to say that is what this article is all about, really. Of course, Jehovah's Witnesses and everyone needs comfort. They need to be reassured that God is going to fulfill his promise. But what about these actual prophecies? What do they portend for the future? And that's what I want to consider here a little bit. Now, we know that the prophecy of Habakkuk focuses on this Chaldean. That's another word for the Babylonians. And we know that the Babylonians came and destroyed Jerusalem. The first part of the prophecy, it says here, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, the ruthless and impetuous nation. They sweep through vast stretches of the earth to seize homes not theirs. They're frightening and fearsome. They establish their own justice and authority. Well, our question is, does this have any application to the future, to our times? Well, the Watchtower has recently said, no, we don't put any stock in this type, anti-type anymore, unless there is clear evidence. Well, is there clear evidence? Well, I would direct you to the second chapter of Habakkuk. And it's a scripture that's often quoted by the Watchtower. Habakkuk said that he was going to stand at his guard post and see what God would speak by means of him. And then God answers Habakkuk, tells him to write down the vision so that one reading aloud from it may do so easily. And here's the verse I want to emphasize. For the vision is yet for its appointed time. It is rushing toward its end, and it will not lie. Even if it should delay, keep in expectation of it. For it will, without fail, come true. It will not be late. As I say, the Watchtower quotes this as a way of keeping Jehovah's Witnesses in expectation of God's coming judgment. Well, what would that judgment entail? Will it involve some counterpart, a modern Chaldean? The answer is absolutely yes. Who will this Chaldean be in the modern? Shouldn't that be a topic for the Watchtower to consider? If you read this article, there is absolutely no endeavor to interpret this prophecy. It's, as I say, a very watered-down, mamby-pamby, limp-wristed, trust God, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But how do we know, though, that this vision is really pointing toward the future? Well, you'd have to turn to the 3rd chapter of Habakkuk. And there, God is shown to take action. And it's miraculous. For example, in verse 4 of chapter 3, his brightness was like the light. Two rays flashed from his hand where his strength was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and a burning fever followed at his feet. He stood still and shook the earth. Well, that didn't happen when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. God didn't come down from heaven and set matters straight, did he? No. It's really talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ, who comes in the name of Jehovah. Didn't Jesus say to keep in expectation of him? And that's what the vision, keep in expectation of it, even if it should delay. Didn't Jesus say that if he should come in the first watch or the second or even the third, keep in expectation he's coming as a thief? We're talking about the second presence of Jesus with war and pestilence. The nations will be in anguish. Heavens and earth will be shaken. As I just read, he stood still and shook the earth. With a look, he made nations leap. So that's what the vision is all about. So then the question remains, who or what is symbolized by the Chaldean? The Watchtower has no input on that whatsoever. To them, it doesn't matter. I submit to you that there are at least a handful of people who think it does matter. So let's consider where we are in relation to this prophecy. The reason we should be interested in this prophecy is because of what Habakkuk says in his conversation with God. After describing this ruthless Chaldean, he says that you are from everlasting, O Jehovah. O my God, my Holy One, you do not die. O Jehovah, you appointed them to execute judgment. My rock, you established them for punishment. Well, we know that that was certainly the case with the Babylonians. God appointed them to punish his people. And I think we've already established, or we will establish, that there is a modern fulfillment, a modern counterpart. Shouldn't we be interested in who God appoints to punish and whom will be punished? You would think that that would be a topic of great interest among Jehovah's Witnesses, but strangely it's not. Well, Habakkuk goes on to describe this Chaldean as so ruthless that he feeds on the nations, dines upon peoples. They're as hapless as fish in a dragnet. For example, in verse 15, he says, all of these he, that is the Chaldean, hauls up with a fishhook. He catches them in his dragnet, and he gathers them in his fishing net. And that is why he rejoices greatly. And that is why he offers sacrifices to his dragnet and makes sacrifices to his fishing net. For by them his portion is rich. And then Habakkuk asks the question, will he then keep emptying out his dragnet? Will he go on slaughtering nations without compassion? So the Chaldean, for certain, did slaughter nations, not just the Jews. Nebuchadnezzar took out Tyre and Egypt and Edom and Moab and Ammon and crushed all the nations in the region. But if the vision is to have a grander fulfillment, what does that mean? Well, I submit to you that this symbolic Chaldean will be manifest as the eighth king. Just to clarify, it has been a policy of the British Empire since the Victorian age that the world is actually overpopulated. That was their policy back when there were less than 1 billion people on the earth. Their policy of the empire is that there are too many people and we have to do some serious population reduction. And you can see that policy reflected in so many ways now. This climate change, global warming, we have to stop using fossil fuels. And no, we can't use nuclear energy either. That's way too dangerous, even though it leaves a zero carbon footprint, as they say. Well, it's obviously a method to destroy nations. Whether they'll actually implement their green policy remains to be seen, but they put a lot of effort into it so far. So population reduction is what we're talking about. And no doubt that is what the eighth king will implement. Look, the British have been angling for a world government for over 100 years. The British Empire itself at one time ruled over a quarter of the world, but they didn't get their hoped-for world government. But it's coming. Jehovah's Witnesses already expect the eighth king to destroy Babylon the Great. Isn't that a punishment from God? But it will involve more than that, obviously. The eighth king supersedes the seventh king. And that, of course, is something that Jehovah's Witnesses cannot appreciate. The Watchtower teaches that the seventh and the eighth king have been ruling since the end of World War I, actually, that the League of Nations was actually this eighth king. And then the eighth king died and went to the abyss and came back as the United Nations, even though both the League of Nations and the United Nations were absolutely and are absolutely impotent, have no power. The Watchtower considers it the eighth king. But those two kingdoms, the eighth king supersedes its predecessor. What we may expect then is for this eighth king to become a world government. That's why he's able to slaughter nations. In the second chapter, verse 5, it says his appetite is as large as the grave. He's like death and cannot be satisfied. He keeps gathering all the nations and collecting for himself all the peoples. There's never been a world government. The peoples of the world now are not subjected to any one government, I should say. The nation-state system is still very much in control and in existence. And that is what this Chaldean will destroy. Do you think that is impossible? Well, consider who really rules the world? The United States, do you think? The Anglo-American duo? It's true, they have a tremendous military force, nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines prowling, space-based weapons probably, who knows? They have tremendous power. But when we get down to it, money really rules the world, doesn't it? You know that saying, money makes the world go round. And when it comes to money, most people don't realize it, but the nations do not control their own monetary system. That's all controlled by a central banking system. And again, most people are unaware that, for example, in the United States, the Federal Reserve is not a federal institution at all. It is a private banking cartel, and it controls the value of money. It loans money to the United States government to run its business, and it collects interest on the money it loans, and the taxpayers pay interest to this private banking cartel. It didn't always used to be that way. The United States used to have its own central bank and extend credit for works needed. And that's the American system. But that all changed in 1913 with the setting up of the Federal Reserve. And then it was accelerated in 71 or 72, I believe, when Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. And that allowed for a financial system based upon speculation. There's no value to the money that the nations use. It can change on a minute-by-minute basis through forex exchange and all of that. But the system runs upon debt. And, you hear about, the national debt is trillions and trillions, and, corporate debt is trillions and trillions, and personal private debt, college tuition debt, home mortgage debt. Everyone is in debt. And the debt bubble just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, there will not be enough money in circulation to pay the debt or to pay the interest on the debt. There's no way the debt will ever be paid. And that's the point. But what happens? What happens when money goes away? When there's not enough money to service the debt? Well, in a sane world, the debt would simply be wiped out. But that's not what's going to happen. What is going to happen is your means of servicing the debt will go away, but the debt will remain. And in that way, this eighth king will take control of everything. Governments will be bankrupted. This ruthless king will close them out. He'll foreclose upon national governments who owe these bankers tremendous sums. He'll foreclose upon corporations that can't service their bonds. He'll crash the stock market, then come back in with gold or whatever and buy all the shares of the bankrupted companies, and he'll own the corporations. Homeowners will not be able to service their debt on their homes or pay their taxes, and they will be foreclosed upon. When God's judgment comes against this ruthless Chaldean, it's interesting what it says in verse 7 of chapter 2. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? They will wake up and violently shake you, and you will become something for them to plunder. Well, what's that talking about? Who would his creditors be? The prince of princes? The incoming kingdom? The sons of the kingdom? Absolutely. But let's go on with verse 8. Because you plundered many nations, all the rest of the peoples will plunder you. Because of your shedding men's blood and your violence on the earth to the cities and those living in them. Woe to the one who makes evil gain for his house. So this eighth king will serve as God's punishing agent. People put trust in their leaders in this system that it's going to go on and on. They don't really trust God, so they're going to be punished. And this system that people trust in will turn upon them. And people will find that they are enslaved to a ruthless king who wants to eat them. I would direct your attention to the 13th chapter of Isaiah. It's Jehovah's denunciation of Babylon. But it is similar in that God explains that, for example, in verse 3, he says, I have issued the command to those whom I have appointed. He's speaking about the warriors of Babylon. I've summoned my warriors to express my anger, my proudly exultant ones. Listen, a crowd in the mountains. It sounds like a numerous people. Listen, the uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. Jehovah of armies is mustering the army for war. And notice this in verse 5. They are coming from a distant land, from the extremity of the heavens, Jehovah and the weapons of his wrath, to bring to ruin all the earth. Wail, for the day of Jehovah is near. It will come as a destruction from the Almighty. And it goes on to say, people are panic-stricken. They're seized with convulsions and pain. Every man's heart will melt, it says in verse 7. Like a woman in labor, they look at one another in horror, with faces inflamed by anguish. Look, the day of Jehovah is coming, cruel, both with fury and burning anger, to make the land an object of astonishment and to annihilate the land's sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give off their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Well, Jesus spoke in a similar way, didn't he? That the heavens would go dark and the moon would not give its light. This is the day of Christ, the day of Jehovah, the day of Jehovah's anger. The Watchtower, it's in my research of their teachings on prophecy over the years, they say that this ruthless Chaldean who brings down the nations is actually Jesus Christ. Even after reading this, Jehovah says the nations are mustering. That's his army. They're coming from the extremity of the heavens, Jehovah and the weapons of his wrath. He's using earthly agencies as his punishing agent. How blind can you get? It is interesting that in the second chapter of Habakkuk, it connects this Chaldean with idolatry. And in the 13th chapter of Revelation, it points out that the revived two-horned beast calls for the making of an image, and the image comes to life. But from God's standpoint, it's nothing. And that's why in Habakkuk 2:18, God asked the question, of what benefit is a carved image when its maker has carved it? Of what benefit is a metal statue and a teacher of lies, even though its maker trusts in it, making worthless gods that are speechless? Woe to the one who says to a piece of wood, awake, or to a speechless stone, wake up, instruct us. Look, it is overlaid in gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. But Jehovah is in his holy temple. Be silent before him, all the earth. So that's what it's going to come down to, isn't it? Satan is going to try to bludgeon all of mankind into worshiping this eighth king, this image of the wild beast. And from Jehovah's standpoint, it is this stupid block of wood. It doesn't matter how sophisticated it is from a human standpoint. It's nothing compared to Jehovah. And that's why he says, be silent before him, all the earth. Well, I've written a little bit about Habakkuk. One of the first essays I've written on eWatchman was about Habakkuk. It's entitled The Final Solution, the Ultimate Final Solution. And then I've reworked some of that and put it in a chapter in the book. The chapter, of course, is called Habakkuk. And I've done a video recently on Habakkuk, and I'll post a link for that. But the Watchtower is right. I mean, in this article they've written, they don't say anything that's untrue. They just don't say much of anything as regards the actual interpretation of Habakkuk or what we may expect in the future. But they're right. We have basis for trusting in Jehovah. Certainly not trusting in the Watchtower. It's not going to be there. It's not going to hold your hand. I mean, you can underline the right answer in the Watchtower, but that's not going to cut it when this thing comes down, is it? Well, in that third chapter, it shows that after this Chaldean thinks he's, got it made, verse 13, it says, you went out for the salvation of your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the house of the wicked. It was exposed from the foundation to the top. You pierced the head of his warriors with his own weapons when they stormed out to scatter me. They were overjoyed to devour an afflicted one in secret. Aren't they going to come after God's people in the end? The two witnesses are killed and as people rejoice, but that merely brings God's wrath down upon them. Well, after Habakkuk, he really got the sense of it, seeing this vision. And he says, I heard and I trembled within. At the sound, my lips quivered and rottenness entered my bones. My legs beneath me were shaking. But I quietly wait for the day of distress, for it is coming upon the people who attack us. And then he goes on to say that although the fig tree may not blossom and there's no fruit on the vines, the olive crop may fail, the fields may produce no food, the flock is gone from the pen, no cattle in the stalls. As for me, I will exult in Jehovah, and I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Thanks for listening. Hope to speak to you soon.